Welcome back for the final session of day two of the National Energy Efficiency Conference 2020. And I've got Zali Steggall waiting in the wings. But before I do that, I need to give you the traditional leaderboard update. And this is, of course, all of you contending for the $500 gourmet dinner in your hometown of choice and making sure that you're making full use of the conference platform. So we have a change in the leaderboard, which is very exciting. Industry stalwart Bill Proudfoot now topping the table at around 19,000 points. Sushil Kumar still in the running from Deakin University. Just behind Bill, Katie Bartrup, as I've repeatedly said, not in contention as a staff member of the Energy Efficiency Council. So I'm going to call Nick McEwer from Flow Power our third place getter. But I do want to give a special shout out to EEC alumni Bradley Anderson, who wasn't even on the table earlier today, but is putting in a very respectable showing at around 14,000 points. So maybe he's our new dark horse candidate. But you've got one more day to rack up those points for that dinner, but we'll leave that for tomorrow to determine, because now it's my great pleasure to introduce you to the member for Warringah, Zali Steggall, OAM, who is joining us live from, I understand, well, maybe I'll let you, Zali, tell you where you are, because it's somewhere very special.
Yes, very exciting evening. Thank you, Luke, and thank you everyone for having me. I'm actually at Warringah Zoo in Mossman for a screening of the ABC documentary After the Fires. So very topical around obviously climate change and the impact on our natural environment and the animals, and really long-lasting impact. So exciting to be here.
Yeah, well, Warringah Zoo, a beautiful and absolute institution here in Australia in terms of their support for Australian wildlife, Australian biodiversity, and an appropriate venue for that documentary. I obviously haven't seen it. I suppose you haven't either, but I have had a look at the trailer, and it looks pretty haunting, to be honest, Zali. A really a sobering view of some of the devastation that was wrought earlier this year by those bushfires, but also the recovery that those communities are going through around the country.
Yeah, look, if you think back 12 months ago, we were, Sydney was shrouded in smoke. We had the whole east coast of Australia very much under threat with bushfires raging. I would argue we had our first climate refugees with, communities being evacuated from beaches. And so that whole issue of our sustainability, reducing our emissions and climate became very real for many communities. And in particular, how much of our way of life was under threat, and our wildlife, really crystallizes, I think, a lot of people's sort of maybe focus once they realize what's at risk. It's easy for us to be caught up in our lives, not focusing always on environmental issues or thinking something's happening somewhere else. But it was a real reminder and a real wake-up call for Australia, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been an incredible year, and not necessarily in a good way, but certainly in a way that has focused our minds. Now, this is a Sundowner. We said we were going to catch up for a beer. We should probably introduce the beer to the endeavour, even if only as a prop. I'm going to drink. You don't have to, Zali. But I understand you do have a good local beer up there in Sydney.
Well, we actually have a number of great indie breweries actually in Warringah, in Brookvale. But what I do have is Four Pines, started in Brookvale,
very good,
who are 100% renewable. So,
there you go.
We've got to stay on topic and on message. So that will be my drink of choice for tonight.
Very, very good. I've got a Little Creatures, which is produced by a large organisation, Line. But the reason we chose this, Zali, is because we actually did a launch. So we do a briefing every year for Australian businesses that are looking to harness, I guess, energy management on their net zero journey. And as you know, we've got more and more businesses that are taking the lead and getting on with it, regardless of the sort of back and forth of policy debates that certainly occur at the federal level. And we were lucky enough to have the head of sustainability for Line join us for the latest launch of that briefing just a month ago. A great story. Line is the first carbon neutral brewer in Australia. They've invested heavily in energy efficiency. They've done the renewables, the power purchase agreements, and they are offsetting a portion reduction of their emissions. But really significantly, the thing that struck me about that was the work that they're doing, having kind of gone on that journey within their own business, starting to work with their supply chains and helping them on that journey, the packaging.
Absolutely.
And like incredibly exciting, that supply chain piece of the economic transition we're working our way through.
And this actually really shows, first you set the goal. You've got to lock in that ambition.
Yep.
And then you actually start the planning of how you're going to deliver on that ambition. And each, there are parts, there are blocks to the puzzle that need to be worked out. And you've got the initial ones when it comes to the renewable energy, getting those power purchase agreements in place and going to net to renewable to zero when it comes to the energy. But then you've got those ways of offsetting the other aspects of your manufacturing or your production, looking at your supply chain, getting all your partners on board as well. That's what, we see the private sector and businesses doing it. They are miles ahead of federal government. State governments are there as well. They're really doing the job. We really need federal government to just get on board now and put in place the right mechanisms that will help the private sector really accelerate their transition.
So Zali, you seem to be implying that you're not in the camp that says that you should wait until you know how you're going to do something before you set the target.
No, and I think it's pretty universal that everyone's saying that's actually not how you achieve great things. And it's been really interesting because I've had a number of talks across so many sectors, and that is just not how you achieve. So even as an athlete, right, from sport, you set a goal of you want to be successful at the Olympic Games. Now, the how...
Just hypothetically, Zali.
Hypothetically, right? As a kid, decided I wanted to be at the top of the podium, go to the Olympics. Now, you don't automatically know all the how, but you do know you're going to have to set in place a plan and you're going to have building blocks. And one thing leads to the other. And you see that in business. I was talking to the Planning Institute of Australia today. That's happening in planning. It happens in every sector. But what you do need to know is what's your destination? We need the driver, and the driver is locking in our net zero by 2050 goal. Make that law so we really have no hesitancy. There is certainty for all sectors. And then how do you get there? Well, you put in place 5-year emission reduction budgets and you get there gradually. I always make the analogy, it's like if you plan to run a marathon, you're not going to go out tomorrow and run 42 Ks. Yep. But what you do is you enroll in an event and then you work your way backwards and you set up a training program and gradually you increase your capacity to get there. It's what we need to do from a national ambition point of view.
I think it's a fantastic analogy. I'm going to return to it, but I do want to sort of pick up your personal story because it's a compelling one. You sort of had that sort of period in the public spotlight, but then you joined the workforce. You were practicing law, quite accomplished in that space. You were a private citizen observing, let's call it a decade of dysfunction in climate and energy politics. You don't strike me as someone that was sort of a raging the barricades over the course of your lifetime, but you have taken on this as a really a personal passion. How did you feel as you were watching this back and forth playing out, particularly at the federal level, and what sort of tipped you over to the point where say I've actually got to step up, I've got to step back into public life, and I've got to do something about this?
Yeah, look, I guess I've always been a very goal-orientated person, and I've never been one to shy away from a big challenge. So just because it's a big goal or ambition doesn't mean you can't get there. You have to break it down into what you can manage. So I did that in my sporting career. Obviously then had kids, got into the work life, as you say, private citizen, get on with the job. But the same theories and approaches apply. To win a case in court, you have to think clearly what is the ultimate outcome you would like the judge to come up with. What is the evidence? What is the case you're going to need to run to get there? And there's going to be compromise, and you're going to go to mediation, and you're going to have to do a lot of, really work with the other side, work with your client. Yep. So I was always a little bit, I guess, stumped with the idea that from a political point of view, we didn't seem to have that common sense approach happening. I think we had a consensus back in 2007 with Rudd and Howard. Howard was maybe late to the party coming to it, but at the 2007 election, we did have a consensus around climate policy. Yep. That consensus continued with Rudd and Turnbull as opposition leader. And then it got really turned on its head by, ironically, the previous member for Warringah, who used it as a leadership challenge. And then we started this decade of topsy-turvy, weaponising climate policy for personal gain, I would argue, in terms of ambitions within politics, as opposed to greater good for Australia as a whole. And I think we need to call time on that, and 2020 should be the year we stop that and we focus on the long-term safety and security of Australia by having good bipartisan climate policy in place.
It's always struck me, sort of observing the Australian political debate, that there's been this strange sort of dysfunction in the parliament, in that if you, I mean, I know we'll get to your climate bill in a moment, but if you had a conscience vote on really any of the proposals that have been put forward over the last 10 years that would have moved the ball forward in this space, there would have been a consensus, I think, a majority.
I agree. I think you would have 80% of the parliament agreeing. And I think at the moment, the way it's structured is you're giving a disproportionate power to a minority who are prepared to wreck the joint. And that is not how democracy should work. You shouldn't be a minority with this disproportionate power to hold everyone to ransom against a better policy. So I think, and the key is finding mechanisms. So I'm not a career politician. I, came from the bar, from my sporting background. And again, like you were saying before, I felt like I can't be a passenger. I can't be a bystander on this issue and on a few issues around politics.
Yep.
And that's why in 2019, I felt like it was time for me to step up. I couldn't privately complain about the state of things if I wasn't prepared to step up and put myself on the line for it. So it was a really big change in career to jump into politics. But again, I think we need more people to consider that move. If you've had a successful professional life, you have a contribution to make to public life, and that's really important. So I felt very motivated that we needed a better discussion, a more sensible, a business-orientated, pragmatic approach around a number of issues, more accountability, a bit more ethics and integrity, I think. And so for me, that was really key drivers to getting into politics and trying to build that consensus forward.
Yeah, and look, I want to now return to your analogy around a sporting career and setting a goal, not knowing how exactly you're going to do it. I described the broad approach to climate politics in Australia over the last 10 years as a little bit like smashing hamburgers, like we're just going for the quick hit, the quick political win, and I feel like we might need some sort of exercise regime, and in some ways I wonder whether your bill would do that, to provide a little bit of structure to us as a nation, getting out of this quick hit and kind of actually looking at that medium and long term goal. I know everyone on the call will have heard about your bill, but would you mind just stepping us through the 3 or 4 key components and what it would actually do were it to be adopted by the Australian Parliament?
And it's really actually important to understand where it's coming from. So for me, a key part was, how do I put forward a sensible position? So something that's going to be down the middle, that really 80% of the community support, can embrace. Yes, there are some elements that would like to see more and more ambition, and then there's others that are coming late to the party. But this is in fact endorsed and supported by vast areas of business, industry, industrial relations, health, all as this is a sensible plan. So I'm not reinventing the wheel. This is actually legislation that was passed in 2008 in the UK. It started in the UK as a private member's bill. It had bipartisan support, and because of the outpouring of support from the community, was passed by the government in 2008. And what it's shown is it's a legislative framework that locks in the ambition in law, and then the accountability to get there. So 5-year emission reduction budgets and public reporting of how a country is tracking. A lot of the planning is done from, you establish an independent climate change commission, which analyses the risks, has the best science around the table, and makes recommendations to government around those 5-year emission budgets, but also around risk adaptation and resilience planning. Now, that's a really important element, because that takes the partisan politics out of our long-term planning, and really ensures we have the facts around the table. We currently get a number of reports, but they're done directly to ministers. They're not automatically public, and the government sits on them for 12 to 24 months, and we don't get the kind of action that's needed. So the bill has the key framework of the bill is the locking in our long-term goal and how we get there, risk adaptation and assessment. So we need to be very clear about how exposed we are. We know there are environmental risks. We know unprecedented risk of natural events. The Bushfire Royal Commission report shows very clearly that we are extremely exposed. But we also have communities that are exposed from an industrial relations, from a jobs point of view. Now, we need to identify those communities and put in place a plan. If we know that there is a 5 to 10 year period in which they are faced with a loss of their major employment, we need to replace that employment. Now, that employment can't be replaced with a turnaround of a couple of months. You need planning for that to happen. So these are all the elements of the risk assessment and planning that needs to happen. But we also need to have our technology assessment. So in that sense, I've adopted in the climate change bill the government's technology roadmap. Now, that is a mechanism that we can keep updating our ambition when it comes to emission reductions with whatever the latest technology is. Because what we have is a discussion always fixed around, what's the 2035 goal or what's 2040? But we have to be really clear. Each sector is going to decarbonise at a different pace. We have different abilities around different sectors. And so I think we need to get a little bit more granular and a bit more specific about how we do it and what technology will assist. So they're the key elements of the bill. And of course, we need the guiding principles. So we need to be doing this fiscally sensibly, responsibly. We need generational equity. We can't leave this to the last minute. We need regional equity because all areas need to be part of the solution. We need good consultation and representation.
Yeah, and that point you just made around some granularity or nuance around how different sectors of the economy are going to decarbonise and what that means in terms of the technology that's available now and where we start and where we sort of roll up our sleeves and do the innovation and the kind of work that Arena champions and continues to prosecute. It's so important. We talk at this high level around mitigation in Australia. We focus on the supply side of the energy sector, but actually there's this whole massive task across the economy. And there's really different barriers and opportunities in different parts of the economy. And one of my hobby horses, Zali, is, we effectively have the technology we need to work to act on the building sector now. Like there are things, there are implementation details and all of the rest of it, but, electrification, insulation, thermal performance, the Europe has embraced, you may have heard, a renovation wave because they've understood that, we're not going to get to our net zero target in any kind of cost effective way unless we upgrade all of our buildings. All of our buildings by 2050. And we don't need to sit in a room and think deep thoughts about whether that's a good idea in Australia or not. It's very obvious that that's where we start. And that is also supporting our energy intensive industries, the industries where there's less clarity about how we decarbonise. It gives them the space to do the pilot projects, invest in the innovation, make sure that that hydrogen economy that we've been talking about today, playing a role particularly in the industrial sector and transport and aviation and the like, that we can ramp that up. And so, anything that would help sort of tease apart, this very kind of hashtag level conversation we have around climate, I think would be incredibly valuable and help sort of raise the quality of the debate in Australia.
Yeah, the building, I know your session today actually had a number around, I think you had all electric homes and commercial buildings. It's a no-brainer that we need to change, we need to update building codes to build, take into account climate risk and geographical risk of where, it's not a one-size-fits-all because risks are different in different areas. The insurance lobby know that. We builders know that. It's really interesting, especially post bushfires where you've got whole communities needing to be rebuilt, that there is a real tension at the moment that we have to build back better. We can't just build back the same. And yet that is not openly acknowledged, and that is not part of the government's focus. So we didn't see, as part of our coronavirus recovery package, building incentives that were built towards building resilience, climate resilience. I mean, let's, achieve a couple of outcomes with the stimulus measures. It's not just about stimulating the economy and creating jobs, but let's create jobs and take care of a cost burden that we know is coming in the future. So things around, double glazing glassing, insulation, energy, thermal efficiency of buildings, designs, building materials. There are so many aspects in which we could be absolutely implementing great change. And we know from a building point of view, I think it's something like 50% of buildings from 2050 will have been built between now and then. So obviously any new buildings need to be absolutely climate resilient. We have the technology. I think we have something like 80% of the technology already now to get to 80% of, the net zero goals. So let's actually start implementing that. And then it's a retrofit of buildings that, I mean, again, that's just a no-brainer. But there is just at the moment a real denial occurring from the government in needing to do this.
Well, I guess the good news, and I'm sure you'll be across this, but we have seen a different approach being taken by state governments around the country. All of the East Coast states and South Australia are investing in upgrading their own public buildings, which is actually really smart stimulus because, they don't have to convince anybody to do anything. They can roll it out really quickly. It's actually saving the taxpayers money on energy bills as well as cutting carbon, and they get those jobs out into the market very quickly. But then you've also seen Victoria take this leadership position around upgrading social housing and the housing of concession card holders. And, there's an electrification piece of that. There's a thermal performance piece of that. And so, there is a movement around the world of governments kind of heeding the advice of the experts, doing exactly what you just said, using this opportunity to kickstart a green recovery. We are doing it in Australia. We're not really yet doing it in a focused way at the national level, but we are doing it at the state level, which is something to be pleased about. I was actually going to ask you about the states because you talked about the dysfunction at the national level. I'm interested in your home state of New South Wales, and I'm talking to both Minister Taylor and Minister Keane tomorrow. But Minister Keane has just had this remarkable outcome around his energy infrastructure roadmap of getting everybody from the Greens to the Nationals to back it in the Parliament. I think the one lone voice, as Mark pointed out yesterday, is Mark Latham, which probably tells you you're on the right track. So, what's your observation? I'm sure you're kind of keeping a weather eye on New South Wales politics, notwithstanding your focus on the federal sphere. What's your observation about how Minister Keane is progressing this agenda? Noting that this is a Conservative government that have taking a very different approach to the energy transition.
Yeah, I think, look, I've discussed energy policy with Matt Keane, with the Minister several times. I certainly support the approach he's taking. I think it's really important that they are showing leadership. It's interesting with the National Cabinet, actually through the virus, that there's that real opportunity for the states to really, I think, they need to actually stand up, take it to the Prime Minister in terms of federally, that they are having to deliver locally at state level, and they're doing that. So I very much welcome the renewable energy zones and the focus Matt Keane and the New South Wales government's had. Look, I think about the only lone voice really talking against it has actually been Angus Taylor at federal level as well, in terms of that it goes against the idea of the gas planned recovery. I think at the end of the day, we really need to focus on the market, where the opportunities, and I just, at the moment, there's a disconnect with where the federal voice is, where the reality of the state voice and the focus is. So I'm really encourage the state governments to get on with the job, do what needs to be done, and have those transition plans, and really set states up, especially New South Wales, to be a real leader in renewable energy and those opportunities. But it does highlight that we need consistency, because it does lead to that question, well, it doesn't even matter what the federal government's doing. And it does, because what happens is that internationally we are getting more and more isolated. If we don't have the federal government in step with our trading partners, we are not at the table for the solutions and the opportunities. 70% of our trading partners are now committed to net zero, mostly 2050 goals. China is 2060. We really need to step up. You've seen that with President-elect Biden. The pressure and the call is coming loud and clear, and I think the government has a very clear choice. Now, the fact that Matt Keane, part of a Conservative government, is able to do it, it shows that this isn't a matter of ideology. This isn't a matter of Conservative politics versus Labor politics. This is actually a question of economics and common sense. I would argue probably New South Wales Liberals probably better reflect a more moderate approach, that at federal level it's gone a lot more conservative, and it's probably why I am here in the job. An electorate like Warringah, traditionally conservative, has been a Liberal seat for many, many years, but is looking for fiscally sensible planning around the challenges of the future, and that's just not coming from federal government. And we're seeing independents actually bubble up, and independent movements bubble up in many areas where there is that dissatisfaction that at federal level there seems to be this inability to grasp the reality.
Well, it's striking to me that, you as has been oft remarked upon, Zali, you've got these net zero commitments in every state and territory around the country. It's the same electorate voting for those governments at the state and territory level, and yet this profoundly different outcome, although not by much. We've had a few sliding doors moments in Australian climate policy. I guess we hope for another one soon, and maybe you're the catalyst for that.
Well, you should say that the discussion has already shifted. So sitting in Parliament, I get the opportunity to really see the language. It was only about a month ago that we had Angus Taylor, or the Prime Minister, standing up ridiculing a net zero by 2050 goal as it's going to wreck the economy. Now, putting aside that that's just nonsense, their language has now shifted to being, look, we really like net zero by 2050, we've just got to work out how to do it, to, it's something we're working towards. So
eminently achievable, I think so.
Eminently, exactly. So the language is shifting dramatically. There's no doubt about that. And so the pressure has to continue. And the pressure is coming from all sectors. It's coming from, I guess, independent MPs like me. It's coming from the community. And it's coming from the energy sector, which is, at the end of the day, playing a huge part in that transition.
All right, well, we're almost out of time, but I know you've got a big date with a committee coming up in Parliament. What's your message to everybody listening in who is inspired by what you're saying and wants to show their support?
So very important for me to have a collaborative approach, and that we need consensus for this to stick as policy. We need consensus that everybody is committed to it. So the climate change bills, the mitigation adaptation framework, was presented to Parliament on the 9th of November. I requested for it to be referred to committee. It was referred to the Environment and Energy Committee, and that is now conducting an inquiry. The inquiry process is open. The written submissions close on Friday the 27th, but you can seek an extension by requesting from the Secretariat. We will then have public hearings, and those public hearings are really that opportunity for sectors to explain on the record to the government why it is important that we legislate net zero by 2050, how this will help your sector have investment certainty and move ahead. And of course, the government needs to respond to that report. It needs to either respond and accept in recommendations the submissions made by all the sectors, or it has to explain why not. So what is the case against it? Because I would argue at the moment we've got sort of delay, which is really the new form of denial, and it's not justifiable on any front, whether it be health, environmental or economic. So it's really time to get on with the job. So please, everyone, if you could go to climateactnow.com.au, or my zalisteggall.com.au website. There's information on how to make a submission. Really important, have your voice heard. The only way change will be achievable is with every additional voice coming to the table, telling the government what needs to be done.
All right, Zali. Well, we're certainly working our way through that process and working with our members to work out what our position is on all of that. We haven't been asked our view on a climate change bill in about 12 months, so this is very, very exciting for us. Look, I just want to say thank you, and especially given that you're out and about to go to a function, for making the time and finding a quiet spot there at the zoo to catch up with us for a beer and to close out day 2 of the conference.
I haven't drunk yet.
Well, there you go. You've had a lot to say, and rightly so. There's a lot to cover in this space, and I wish you all the best as you continue to try and play a constructive role in landing a debate that has been a vexed one for Australia for a while now. I think there's plenty of people on the call that would be delighted if we could settle some of the basic parameters of what we're dealing with here and get on with getting some stuff done to address them. So thank you, Zali Steggall.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that wraps up day 2 of the National Energy Efficiency Conference 2020. It's just left to me to remind you that I am online at 10 a.m. tomorrow, AEDT, with Energy and Environment Minister Angus Taylor. So we look forward to seeing you bright and early in the morning for that discussion. Until then, goodbye for now.